Hello, I'm Jamie Sanchez, and it's up to me to sever them all.
I'm Lauren Fates, and I live alone. Am I going to turn into a fairy?
Are you ready for the beat?
I'm ready for the beat. Welcome all bounty hunters in the star system. It's another episode of the Bebop Beat. We have, as usual, been keeping track of Cowboy Bebop news, and the weird thing is, this week a lot of things got announced at the last minute. So, for example, Steve Conti, a former guest of the show, friend of the Bebop Beat, as well as Raj Ramaya, they got together for a Twitch stream. They were going to talk about anime and video game songs and their time with Yoko Kanno, and this was on May 11th. But the thing is, I didn't see an announcement for it until May 6th. So I did my best. I put it on our Twitter. I hope some of our listeners saw it. And Jamie, I heard that you have a couple of announcements like this too.
Yes, in fact, voice actor Steve Bloom, who plays Spike Spiegel, tweeted on May 8th about a May 8th stream. So he was doing a live autograph session on Instagram. I presume there'll be many others like this. So now would be a good time to subscribe to Steve's Instagram account so you can get on top of that.
Yes, I heard of the music event through Mary Elizabeth McGlynn on Twitter. So I hope you're all following the Bebop Cast on social media. And hey, Bebop Cast, advertise sooner.
One other really cool project that's going on in Kickstarter sphere is a game called Orbital Blues. It's a blues-infused space western role-playing game with an accompanying cassette EP. The creators have explicitly mentioned that they are being influenced by Cowboy Bebop, Firefly, and Guardians of the Galaxy. There is a headline that says, really big, real folk blues. They've already reached their campaign goal, and they have 38 hours left, so hopefully they'll be reproducing these later on for additional purchases. I'm going to try to get my hands on one of these.
Well, I congratulate that campaign. That's so awesome that they met their goal. I know by the time this is out, our listeners won't be able to contribute, but I have really high hopes that that stuff will still be available. My friend Eric did a Kickstarter recently for a book of D&D campaigns based on popular music. And the cover was Carly Faye Jepsen. Get it? Ha ha ha. Anyway, they reached a bunch of stretch goals. They were very successful. And because they were successful, I know they're going to be offering that book to more people. So I'm still glad we're spreading the word. Hopefully we can get our hands on that. We have reached a big milestone, at least for the Blu-ray owners at home. Jupiter Jazz Part 1 marks the end of the second Blu-ray. So as far as the Blu-rays are concerned, we are halfway through. Great job following along, everybody.
Jupiter Jazz itself is an amazing two-parter. I think this is really the episode that made me realize how all-encompassing and emotionally impactful the entire series is going to be as a first-time watcher.
I agree. Watching this again, I could feel that nostalgia. I could remember when I was a teen seeing this for the first time. This was the type of episode I really liked. I really love, when it comes to Cowboy Bebop, those lore episodes that really push forward the core plot. I know you're a fan of Vicious. I'm a fan of Julia. So anything that actually tells us more about where that's going, Jupiter Jazz really shows us, like, the end of the show is going to be about this. I think it's very clear.
And what little lore we've gotten so far about Spike's backstory comes in episode 12 and 13, and then we don't hear about it again until the final episode. So we thirsty, and this is a welcome reprieve.
Thankfully, we have an awesome guest today. We are shocked by how quickly this came together. We're going to let you peek behind the curtain a little bit, listeners, and tell you that this interview we did today came together in like 36 hours. We found the voice actor who played Gren in the dub of Jupiter Jazz Part 1 and 2, the English voice of Gren. It was a little bit difficult to do because, as you may know, his kind of stage name when he was doing anime was different than what he's listed as on IMDb. So later this episode, we'll be talking to Dave Thomas all about Gren.
But until we get to that, we have some episode to cover. And boy, howdy, this is one.
I believe you mean shucks howdy in the tradition of Big Shot.
Which they do make an appearance in such a heavy-handed episode. I appreciate the show's creators continuing with their moments of levity in very dark and grim content here.
It's true, we have a lot of throwbacks of the recurring characters in Jupiter Jazz. It opens with Bull, the sort of Native American character that we saw earlier in Spike's arc. This scene is heavily debated in the fandom. I don't want to get too far into spoiler territory, but when it comes to the fate of Spike Spiegel and what ultimately does or doesn't happen to him, this first scene with Bull comes up a lot. There is a falling star, and Bull says this is a lost soul who has finished his last battle on this planet, but could not find his way to where the Great Spirit awaits us all. He refers to this soul as pitiful. In the sub-translation that I have, it's less about getting to an afterlife and more about not believing in the Great Spirit in general. But regardless, the implication is there's a warrior who has passed away but didn't make it to that final destination. And I think going to let the people at home ponder that for what that could mean for the end of this anime.
Well, this episode is very poignant and moving in a lot of cases. I feel like it weighs too heavily on coincidence. For example, Bull in this shot is nearby Jupiter somehow, even though we've only seen him on Tijuana. In later episodes, we find that he ends up in other strange places, much like the three old men. But on top of that, we're immediately thrown into the Red Dragon plot where Vicious is approaching the van. The van are a set of elders that essentially have the controlling interest of the syndicate under wraps. We learn in this scene that Vicious isn't implicated in Mao's death, but he isn't fully trusted either. And it appears he's being tested with the drug deal that Gren has come to him with.
I am glad to have you here to explain all of this, because even now, what's going on with Vicious and what he's asking for were a little unclear to me. He has red eye. He's looking for financial support on Callisto, I believe. And this brings him before this council of, in my opinion, identical looking sort of old wise men. We also get to learn more about Lynn in this episode and in this scene. And I'm pleased by that because Lynn is in the live action as well. We're going to meet more of that character in the Netflix reimagining. The scene you're talking about has the foreboding quote, "A snake cannot eat a dragon." Do you think the dragon is Spike? Is that the metaphor we're going for? Or is the dragon like just destiny? You can't overcome something bigger than you.
I think they're being a little bit more straightforward here in telling Vicious not to overstep his bounds. They know he's up to something, and they want to make sure that they've planted their foot in the ground like a scary syndicate trio.
So they're just talking about themselves. They're like, a snake can't eat us, the dragon.
Right. They're like, who's this uppity young upstart? The van knows Vicious was caught up in something 3 years prior when Spike left the syndicate. They also likely know that Mao had been essentially taking Spike and Vicious under his wing and trained them to be the brutal assassins, or so we presume as the viewers. And for Mao to just up and die, and before that, Vicious to also up and die, this isn't a very good track record for Vicious himself, right? There's a lot of doubt circling him. And it comes to me as surprise when Lin, who steps in to say he will uphold the Red Dragon's vision, he serves by their word, and that he's going to Callisto with Vicious to protect him. And Vicious responds, "It's up to me to sever them all." I don't know if Lynn hears this. I don't know if there's an inkling that there's some kind of coup in the background, but it's clear the elders know something is up. I feel like Lynn's a little naive soldier dude, just kind of being like, sure, whatever that means, Vicious.
I think Lynn hears it. I think Lynn is, even if he is sort of an underling, I think he's a consenting one. I think he has autonomy. Vicious has this very interesting line where he says, if you're going to survive, you'll have to betray me. And I think he maybe even says several times. And Lynn's like, no, I'm not going to do that to you. But we find out later in the episode, Lynn also used to work under Spike. He's gotten bigger and stronger since then, but he is still an underling. So there's something about Lynn's personality or the dynamic between Spike and Vicious and Lynn that has kept Lynn in this place where he's like a number 2, and it sounds like he's okay with it. I think he feels he's good at it, and we see by the end of the episode that he is.
I feel like this is a perfect opportunity to give a big shout out to a Lynn fan shrine that still exists on the internet. It's called Tungari. It's this little 600 by 500 pixel fan art website. And the navigation items are Lynn, who? And pretty much way more content on this site than you would expect for a character who's around for all of 4 minutes.
I have forgotten all about the idea of fan shrine websites. What a wonderful throwback. I used to have a fan shrine to Hiro Yui from Gundam Wing, and it was very popular because for sure I had the largest collection of Hiro pictures on the internet, many of them stolen. I think these days, a website like I had would get in trouble for not asking permission. But I didn't ask for permission. I just worshipped this one character from Gundam.
Well, shout out to the Warm Trombone for keeping this alive on Angel Fire all these years.
Angel Fire is still a thing?
Apparently.
This is a great day.
I wish I had known. I would have put all of my fan sites on there.
I know, all of us who banked on like Alta Vista, we've met our maker.
After Lynn and Vicious hash out whatever they're doing, they head to the Blue Crow on Callisto. We cut to a distraught Bebop crew. It's very hot and humid. Spike can't sleep. Edge just kind of milling about, searching for something online, and everyone's very despondent. That's when we learn from Jet that Faye ran off and wrecked their coolant system and stole all their cash. Why would she do such a thing, Lauren?
I think this episode tries to answer that question. Jet and Spike are quick to get angry and frustrated and accuse her of being selfish and all about Faye, unpredictable. They call her a wench. But later on, the episode starts delving into her insecurities. And the answer to why she left might actually be more about what she was afraid to lose. Getting so close to these people, getting into a routine, and starting to care about others, she wanted to leave them before they could leave her and hurt her first.
I mentioned earlier coincidences, and this would be the second coincidence that I have earmarked in my notes, in that Faye happens to run off to the same city where Gren has contacted Vicious to make a drug deal. So it just happens that the Bebop crew is orbiting Jupiter. We get to see it up close for the first time, and that we know that terraforming was successful on this planet, but it's still a lawless, frigid hellhole. But yes, there's a lot of circumstantial events going on in the background to allow this plot to unfurl.
You are absolutely right. I don't think I was thinking about it while watching it, but a planet is huge, and a moon is huge. And even if we're to sort of give this plot the benefit of the doubt, Faye left very recently, so of course she'd go to the nearest place. The idea that she would go not only to this specific bar, but a bar in a town where there are no women, and she didn't seem aware of that, that is a huge coincidence and very odd.
I would argue that perhaps she knew. Perhaps that's the same reason Julia likely escaped to Callisto and ended up at the Blue Crow as well. It is a little frustrating, though, as an anime watcher. Just kind of like, okay, this is kind of hand-wavy. I'll lean into it because I want more lore, but maybe not this extreme.
Thankfully, something the episode does really well, in my opinion, is happening at the exact same time. That is the fight between Spike and Jet, as Spike decides to leave and find Julia. In looking for Faye, Ed discovers the codename Julia floating around on the internet, caught up in some illicit matter. Spike hears this name, he immediately has to go, and he stops caring that Faye has stolen the antifreeze and all of their money. He's going to find his woman. And it's pretty clear that tensions on the Bebop were high before this point, and this is just sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back, because Jet just can't believe that Spike is abandoning him and abandoning the ship at this time. They have an extremely emotional falling out where they're accusing each other of being lonely and desperate and having the wrong priorities. We've seen Jet in this place before where he's like, I don't need anybody, I don't care about them at all. And now more than ever, it's obvious that Jet cares so much and he's so upset that all at once, both of his like quote unquote kids would just bail while he is stuck in a rut with no money in a freezing ship.
To me as a viewer, it's pretty clear that Faye wants them to go look for her. She ends up at Rester House. At one point, she says she's trying to blow off steam through a big martial art fight that we don't get to see. But I don't know. I don't like this game she's trying to play where, okay, I don't want to be here on the ship. I'm going to go elsewhere. And the Bebop can't go anywhere. I'm going to disable its capabilities to travel away from where I am because I want them to go look for me.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use the word want, but certainly assumes that they will, right? Like thinks that no matter what, somehow this dalliance of hers is going to come to an end and she'll end up back on the Bebop. I don't know if she cares if it's Jet or if it's Spike, but I feel like she is taking them for granted, and I agree, it's not very cool of her. Or it is very cool, because she stole the antifreeze. Boo! So, to the point of coincidences, she ends up in this bar where Gren, also known as Mr. Saxophone, is playing the song Goodnight Julia, or Julia, depending on who you ask. It is a really lovely track. It comes back several times in the episode, whether or not Gren is actually playing it in world. And it really makes the viewer feel like we are just steps behind Julia. Like whatever happened to her, we just missed it. And I find that very enticing and an interesting, non-verbal way of telling that tale.
She is our Carmen Sandiego.
Where on Callisto is Julia?
Of everybody's reaction to the loneliest they're now faced with, Spike's was the most visceral for me. At the moment that Ed mutters Julia and Jet mentions that, hey, this is a common woman's name, why are you going to throw all this away? And he runs off in this passion fit, essentially. He's so driven to find her. But Faye, contrastingly, doesn't have that person to find. She just happens to stumble upon someone that's worth interacting with. Gren comes up, Mr. Saxophone makes a big impression on her right away, and she's compelled to now stay with him, a complete stranger. And the two, it reminds me a lot about noir films where things happen and the relationships evolve very quickly, and people are motivated by just deep loneliness and a bit of ennui, I would say.
Spike is definitely in that place this whole episode, because after he interrogates some people and he asks around about Julia, and we have yet another somewhat homophobic scene with a prostitute named Julius, these gang members with like gas masks almost, they corner him and they assume he's vicious. And just like the name Julia really set him off, the accusation that he might be vicious really triggers him as well and sends him into this violence that, in my opinion, is pretty unwarranted. I mean, yeah, these guys were pretty obviously going to harm or even kill him, but he doesn't know who they are or what their motivation is. He does not care. Once he gets that accusation of being vicious, he's going to take them down no matter what. He doesn't care to hear any more information, and I found that very startling.
Both Spike in that scene where he switches from nonchalant, gonna run away, maybe kick a few guys in the face, to I'm gonna outright murder you for comparing me to Vicious. And then Faye, jumping ahead, when she recognizes Vicious in the photo. It really speaks to the level of PTSD that both Spike and Faye have for Vicious. She automatically jumps into this flight response, and Spike automatically jumps to the fight response. And I mentioned this in Ballad of Fallen Angels, where Vicious only gets 12 minutes of screen time this entire series. And yet, those 12 minutes where he's referenced really give you a sense of lore. This really big, impending sense of doom that is his... oh man, I love Vicious! They really give you this picture that he is just this psychopath that isn't to be explained. He isn't to be trifled with. He's just off the meters all around.
It's funny because as much as I agree with that energy and that enthusiasm for who Vicious is, I think what Bebop is really selling that I am totally buying is that Spike and some of our other characters are not as far off from being vicious as maybe they hoped they'd be. If Spike is on this hair trigger and just the mention of this name makes him basically want to kill some people, at some point I think he has to look in a mirror and confront, like, am I vicious too? But I think there's a interpretation of this story that people become like this through exposure to Vicious or through the abuse of Vicious, still making him the ultimate big bad. But not all of their actions are forgivable either. Like, we're learning in this episode that everyone's a little bit vicious, and that's cool.
Shout out to Guinevere on the Cowboy Bebop Facebook group. Quote, why didn't Spike ever just go see a therapist once? Space therapy too expensive? Guinevere, I guess it is. This poor guy.
Listen, not to put too fine a point on it, but I know plenty of, like, cis men who could really just use therapy and don't see what they're doing as a problem. And you have to admit that you have a problem before you go to therapy. Spike hasn't done that. He thinks he's being reasonable. I could see Jet go to therapy, maybe someday.
So, speaking of Jet, he's gone down to the Blue Crow as well, the city, and found his own bar to essentially drown out his sorrows. And the bartender has the gall to mistake him for a bad dude. Like, to rub salt in his wounds.
Yeah, the bartender says, it's okay, my guy. Even I have a bounty on my head. And it really got me wondering how common bounties are. I guess there must be a lot of them if being a bounty hunter is such a viable career.
300,000 bounty hunters in the system? I sure hope there's enough bounties to keep them paid.
Yeah, that many people staying afloat. There's a lot of criminals out there. And we did learn in our dive into the manga that a bounty could be as low as 100 oolongs. So maybe everyone has a bounty on their head. Maybe I have a bounty on my head.
We also learned from the manga that Faye learned all her chops from Linda. And so now her foray into martial arts badass form actually makes a little bit more sense in that context. I think she knows how to be a badass gunshot woman. I don't know what you call them, snipers. I think she can kick some real ass.
I really appreciated the, like, double entendre that Faye ended up bringing, wandering out into the night, being like, I just wanted to blow off some steam. I just wanted to take out some of this frustration. Like, does she mean sex or does she mean a brawl? It could be either. I respect that.
Or que no los dos.
Or que no los dos, something we ask on this podcast often.
Let's talk a bit about Faye meeting Gren at Rester House. There's a point where Faye had just come off from this cold, frigid street in the city. She's clearly underdressed for this environment. She looks like she's already suffering a cold, which is a very common trope in anime. Once you've been exposed to cold, you're gonna get a cold. Science has proven otherwise, but we'll lean into it. And so she's drinking what I presume is more like a hot toddy to kind of help her acclimate to the frigid weather there. And Gren comes up to her after she sneezes. And Gren says, take care, because if you don't tell someone take care after they sneeze, they'll turn into a fairy. And little does he know that Faye's name is also a translation of the word fairy here, which could be an allusion to her elusive, rare, and mysterious, ageless look about her.
We did some quick fire Googling before this broadcast to figure out if that fairy myth is actually a thing in any cultures. And the first Google result that came up was from Cowboy Bebop. So I don't think this is a wide-held belief about sneezing.
So Faye goes and picks a fight, or is looking to pick a fight, and the fight comes to her. And just before she goes and punches some assholes in the face, Gren appears out of nowhere, Mr. Saxophone, with his giant saxophone case, and whacks him right across the head. They go on this run away from these bad guys in what we see more of the setting, right? The Blue Crow itself, being a city on the moon of Callisto, seems to be steeped in Eastern European or Russian kind of backgrounds. We see a lot of those kind of Slavic languages on the signage. And we also get a good sense that how run down this place is. It truly is a lawless region. But it looks like it could have been a thriving city at some point. I imagine there's another rundown cathedral somewhere in this city.
Yes, because what would a Cowboy Bebop setting be without a rundown cathedral for us to go shoot up? It has to be there, Jamie.
It does.
I really liked the conversation that went on between Gren and Faye, starting at the Rester's house and ending at Gren's home, because it really digs into your question, which was, why did Faye leave? She has this narrative in her mind that she's ready to deliver about how men always end up fighting over her like dogs, and it's just easier to be alone, and real solitude is preferable to feeling alone in a group. And as much as I personally agree with the latter part of that, I don't think there's actually any evidence that Spike or Jet were fighting over her. I think this might be a narrative she's telling herself to justify why she has done what she has done. Taking all the money in antifreeze is not cool. I think she maybe still has a thread of conscience that is urging her to look upon herself and realize she's been a shitty roommate. She's been a bad friend. So she's telling herself all the reasons why her behavior is justifiable.
I read it a little differently. I think some part of her wants to be fawned over by her roommates, and she's not getting that, which is perhaps why she feels so lonely. She's used to being a figure ogled and manipulated, and this is the only life she's known so far. And as we find out with her past, she doesn't have much else to grow on or to warm up to, given her full experience as this Faye.
I think there is validity there, especially because we see her, in my opinion, flirt with Gren long after Gren has said that they have no interest in women, or women aren't really their style. Faye still, when Gren goes to take a shower, says that she can't guarantee she won't peep. She just can't help but flirt. And I think maybe you're right. She's just hungering for something and is putting it out there even when somebody already said they aren't interested.
We also know she uses her sexuality, though, as a weapon. So perhaps this is her attempt at kind of shoring up her defenses from a stranger she knows nothing about.
I will put in a sort of embarrassing aside here that when I was young, Faye was acting so groggy and the scene is shot so soft and warm. I was wondering if Faye had been drugged or if Gren had done something insidious. Absolutely not. Gren is super honorable and Faye is like pouring whiskey for herself even while they're in the bathroom, just like drinking more. That's all her doing.
She's no stranger to making herself at home.
I feel like it's worth mentioning that I, during this episode, I think have switched already between using he, him pronouns to they, them pronouns for Gren. The show and the wiki explicitly do say he, him, but we're going to learn in our interview later this episode that maybe things aren't actually as clear as the anime presented them. And we do know that Gren in the new show is going to be non-binary and is played by a non-binary actor. So I am making the choice to say they, them based on the new Gren. But we are aware that in the anime, Gren's pronouns are he, him, at least in the dub.
Faye, while she's waiting for Gren in the shower, has, like you said, poured herself some more vodka, getting relaxed, and she's looking over photos of their past. We see some really heartwarming scenes of Gren with a younger kid, perhaps a family relation. We see essentially a large social network that probably doesn't exist anymore on this lawless city. And among those photos is one taken of Gren's time in the Titan War. We learn later that the Titan War takes place on the moon Titan. Gren was part of it, and somehow also Vicious is enlisted in this war. Through the movie, we learn more awful things about the Titan War we can't really get into here, but we as viewers are supposed to know that it is an uninhabited moon of Jupiter. It has no residents, and it's strictly there to fight this war. So there's a sense of camaraderie in the photo automatically, even though Vicious is looking over his shoulder sideways. Gren's smiling warmly. They clearly keep this photo for some reason. And Faye's looking over it, and her face just drops, right, when she notices this figure in the background. The phone's ringing incessantly. There's tension building, and the voicemail kicks in, and it's Vicious's voice. She remembers distinctly his voice, and that triggers her into this state of panic. All of a sudden now, we're wondering, okay, why is Vicious involved? How is he even connected to Gren? Fan theories about this include things like, oh, Vicious was enlisted before he ever became a dragon. Or, my favorite, Vicious was enlisted because he was a dragon. Perhaps he was an espionage agent. Or, as we learn in part 2, he's there to plant evidence. And that just makes the story even more compelling. How are all these people intertwined? What is going on here? And how will it all unfold in part 2?
I think something that is not helpful in this part of the anime is that these characters, in my opinion, should be drawn maybe much younger looking. I'm having a hard time understanding how long ago this was or where in time the Titan War was. Like, if we're supposed to think these men were brothers a long time ago, I think they look the same in that photo.
There's speculation that it was possible, and this is getting into spoiler territory, that Spike and Julia bonded over Vicious's absence while he was at the Titan War. That seems to be the best placement for that event to have occurred.
I really like that fan theory, but there's so much art of the three of them together, like at the pool hall and on the subway. And so maybe that bond was built during that time. But I feel like the story being told by a lot of the official art is like this was happening under Vicious's nose, which makes it a much more jealous story, even than, well, you were away, so what was I supposed to do? I think it can be both. Por qué no los dos?
I really appreciate the thought that Spike and Vicious were brothers until Julia entered the picture and Spike couldn't help but fall in love with her. But maybe he maintained his boundaries for so long, but perhaps it was Vicious's absence that caused his lapse in judgment. And then he spiraled out of control, and we will learn more about that later.
Before we get to the interview, I have a couple of just little things that I caught or liked during this episode. One is, while Spike is about to fly off to look for Julia, for whatever reason, the Swordfish 2 is really banged up looking. The art in this moment really highlights what bad shape that little ship is in. My interpretation of that was that maybe Jet and Spike are constantly doing repairs, and in this moment, the Swordfish is in more of a state of disrepair, making it seem all the more desperate and odd that Spike would just up and go, because it's not even the right time for that. Like, we haven't even fixed your ship yet, my dude. But I haven't really decided if maybe that's how the ship is always supposed to look. Do we know if these 3 ships of these 3 characters are supposed to be upheld or not?
I don't think Jet has much money for body work. He's off fixing, like, broken cannons and buying cheap missiles, and I think he's doing the bare minimum to keep them flying.
So this was just an opportunity for the animators to show us what the Swordfish 2 really looks like most of the time. I can get behind that. We didn't talk much about Ed this go-around. Ed's role is not very large. I found it interesting that in the sub, when she is looking for Faye, she's saying, like, konnichiwa and sayonara, and the translation says hello, goodbye, but then they just keep it in Japanese in the dub as if it's, like, quirky that she's speaking Japanese, which is just like an added level, I guess, to Ed's oddity linguistics. Ed also has a cardboard computer. It appears that the bottom half of her, like, rig has cardboard components. I'm trying to figure out if, like, the body of her CPU is actually supposed to be made of garbage, or if she just did, like, a stylistic choice.
No, that is the intent. Yes, she came from garbage Earth, and the only CPU case she could find is this garbage box.
Shout out to the video game company Cardboard Computer, creators of Kentucky Route Zero. Is that where you got your name? Is it? Call me. And lastly, I'm not sure we said it out loud, but Gren is technically the bounty this episode. We learn a little bit about how bounty hunting works, in that Big Shot actually says the statute of limitations on this bounty is almost over. Judy seems to have a little bit of a crush on Gren, says he's a good-looking guy. But Grencia Mars Elijah Guo Ekener, he's about to have the clock run out on his bounty, and I think that means they'll be free if the time runs out. Is that the impression that you got?
I believe so, yeah. We also learned that Gren's escaped from some kind of facility, but we don't understand what is behind that escape. It isn't until Faye approaches them in the shower. Shout out to that animation artist, where Faye just whips out her gun and points it directly at Gren. And then we have this reveal that Gren actually has breasts and likely is wearing binding otherwise, which we would not have known had we not had a shower scene.
Yeah, this is a famous scene in that the animation shows Gren's breasts. Faye says out loud, "a woman," and then sees additional anatomy that maybe brings that into question. Gren talks about themselves saying they are both, but neither. And we'll get into that more during our interview, that in the new show, we're definitely going with a non-binary character, a non-binary actor, and that is the term that's going to be used on Netflix. But I don't think that language existed during the 90s. And so the intent for what we were trying to say here is a little bit more gray.
So we cut from this very intense scene where Faye is essentially shocked and backed into a corner to Spike confronting Vicious and Lynn stepping in. Spike yells, "Are you seeing Julia behind my back?" Which, wow, what a bold statement. It's definitely coming from a place of anger, but it's also something that he is accused of and definitely has done to Vicious.
What a hypocrite. The Spike Spiegel hypocrisy show.
He's clearly angry, and Lynn is, in his purest hearts, the red dragon through and through, jumps in between what would have been a second ballad and stops this action. He points a gun. At first, you think maybe it's reluctant, but no, he's gonna shoot. And sure enough, Spike falls to the ground on his back. We as the audience only see the sky on his way back until he hits the ground.
And thus a cliffhanger for for the rare Cowboy Bebop 2-parter and the transition into Blu-ray number 3.
Is he dead, Lauren? Did he die?
You know they all died at the end of Toys in the Attic, so this isn't even real, Jamie.
This is all just Ed's fever dream.
From that point forward, it's all been fanfic, baby. I do want to give just like a shout out to Lynn himself and the fact that nobody does actually have beef with him. Like Spike in all of his rage comes out onto this roof like, "Are you seeing Julia behind my back?" And then he says, "Hey Lynn, you've gotten pretty big." Like, nice gains, friend. It's good to see you.
He doesn't work for you anymore. That stuck out to me. That tells me that Spike was actually managerial level Red Dragon material. I fail to believe that.
I think Spike was a different person before Cowboy Bebop started. I think he absolutely had the potential to be that man, but we're never going to see that man. Or maybe we do this episode a little bit. This is Spike at his most violent and his most impulsive, and I actually can see it a little bit this time.
He's not empathetic to anybody here, which is so unlike the previous episodes we just watched.
No, honestly, I think the bringer of empathy this episode is Gren, who is a character we've never met before, and yet somehow becomes this commenter, this sort of wise observer of what's going on in the lives of these 4 characters we have spent all of our time with. They are dead on in their analysis of what's going on with Faye, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that ability coming up. We've got a very special guest for you this week, and I am in just shock and awe by how quickly we were able to book this person. It took some digging because if you know the character of Gren, you know they were credited to one name, but this gentleman goes generally by another. So we have the original American voice of Gren here with us today, artist Dave Thomas. Welcome.
Welcome, Dave.
Thanks so much for having me, ladies. I'm really excited to be here. I've done a lot of anime, and the stuff that I did with Cowboy Bebop is certainly some of the most peculiar anime I did.
So I'm going to jump ahead because we were talking about this before we started recording. And some fans at home who are really diehard Cowboy Bebop aficionados might realize that Dave Thomas is not the voice that Gren is attributed to, and you had started to tell me that story. So would you like to explain that to the fans?
Okay, so the reason I picked those 2 names and put them together and to make an imaginary character was because back in those days, we needed to be in the union, but a lot of this anime stuff that we were doing was non-union stuff. And everybody was trying to make a living doing voiceover. And you guys have talked to a lot of really good professional voices that have made livings at it. Back then, it was sort of like cowboy days. And we did all sorts of different stuff. When I did this project, for a while, SAG and AFTRA were really coming down hard on the lowest moneymakers, of the tree. So we worked under a lot of different false names. The reason I picked Robert Matthews was because my foster son's name is Robert, and my nephew's name is Matthew. And so I made a name out of both of those guys so that in case they ever saw it, they would be like, "Oh yeah, Uncle D," or my dad did this, yada, yada.
That's such a lovely tribute. Thank you for sharing.
We're also very fortunate that IMDb helped us put these pieces together because we would have never found you otherwise.
Yeah, this stuff, I've never camped in a Radisson as a Boy Scout.
I did. So, okay. Dave is referencing the questions we sent in advance because IMDb is a wild place. And there are some really interesting facts about Dave on this website, and we are not even sure where they're from. But one of them is that he was a Boy Scout and spent some time doing like survivalism in the jungle in Guam.
Yeah.
And I'm just shocked by that because I was a Girl Scout in America. And depending on who your like den mother was in the Girl Scouts, maybe you'd camp in a cabin. But one of the den moms was very bougie and she had us quote unquote camp at a Radisson hotel. So please tell us about this Boy Scout experience. I'm riveted.
That is hysterical. My dad was in the military. And so he started out as a navigator bombardier. And so and then he did other things where he did a lot of flight work. And so he had to do these survival courses in case he landed out, in some harsh, different climate. And so he got all kinds of different survival training for, the northern woods, the tropical jungles, the desert. And so he used to share a lot of that with me. And so I was very into adventuring when I was a kid. And I read some really, really cool books. And I was always out running around in the woods and, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But yeah, in Guam, I was in the Boy Scouts. I went to the World Boy Scout Jamboree, was there when I was there. And I met scouts from all over the world. And and I almost cut off my friend's hand with a machete.
What?
I mean, there's other stuff that wasn't in there. I met the Dalai Lama when I was working as a stage manager in Los Angeles, and some other really cool people like Robert Mitchum. I got to hang out with him for a couple of weeks on Winds of War. I got to hang out with Jose Greco, the famous flamenco dancer. And I used to hang out all the time with the Nicholas brothers. Now, the Nicholas brothers were famous hoofers, not tap dancers, but hoofers, which is a completely different kind of fast footwork dancing. And we used to just have the most hysterical times.
So anyone following your Instagram account would know right now that you have made the move from LA, where you had apparently lots of really great experiences with a lot of amazing creatives, to the rural area you're in. And it looks like you love it. And it makes a lot of sense with your scouting background, your love of wilderness. What drove you to that decision?
Well, my whole life, I've always kind of talked to animals and had this empathetic thing with animals. I can be in the middle of any place and, a hawk will come up and hold out a wing and say, "You got to help me. Somebody really messed me up and you're the only guy I can trust here." But I've spent a lot of time out in the outdoors as a kid. And then I lived in LA for 40 years and worked in the entertainment industry. I fell out of that because I didn't like the life. It was all on the road. And that was the same thing about theater too. I really loved theater, but Monday night, that's your go out night. Who wants to go out on a Monday night? Nobody.
So Jamie and I both have some experience with video games. I know you from Metal Gear Solid 3 as the Sorrow. Jamie knows you as the Barbarian from Diablo 2. Are you a gamer yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I really enjoy playing video games. I used to play first-person shooter games when they first come out, but, a lot of the stuff that I went through earlier in life, I lost all, I don't like guns anymore. I don't like guns. I don't like death. I don't like killing things. I don't like any of that stuff. What I really like recently is Journey.
That is a wonderful game. It is beautiful.
Right?
It puts you with real people.
Yeah, and it does that too. And the cool thing about that is that nobody can really talk. Now, I've actually met players in the game that walk out big letters to say thank you or hi or whatever. And that was really cool.
I've had people draw hearts in the sand, and I found that very moving.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that your life is voice work, among other things, but that you like a game that includes very little, if no communication via voice.
Well, when I was a little kid, I learned how to communicate to animals without talking. And it's a lot of observations about behavior and learning how to put yourself in that animal's head and and imagine what it must be like that this human is looking at you. Are they trustworthy? Should I run? Should I attack? But I've talked to coyotes out here. I've seen 6 or 8 different bobcats. One of the bobcats was the biggest bobcat I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it must have been easily over 85 pounds. I mean, it had a head the size of a basketball.
How do you not run away in terror? That would be me.
I know that they're not interested in me. And, the other thing is predators are oftentimes more scared of you than you are of them. And they're mostly scared about getting injured, because if they get injured, they can't eat. So that's why most predators run away. And the only reason that they attack humans, like on bikes, is because there's just not enough food, because we've just ruined the environment. So that's the great thing about being up here, is I live in a very pristine environment. I mean, there are salamanders down in the creek, and I have forest frogs and other indicator species of a really healthy environment. And I'm selling my house. I'm moving to a boat. I'm leaving it all behind, and I'm going on an adventure to write. I really like essays. And so I want to write a collection of essays. I write other things like screenplays and do other things too. And that's what Hollywood and Holly Wild is all about.
So as we were assembling questions for speaking to you today, we noticed how many different types of media you've been in, from the protagonist in Royal Space Force to more recently Cleve Kelso in The Fast and the Furious. Do you see yourself continuing this career when you're moving out to the boat, or is that going to be it?
I did think about that. For a long time, I was going to put a studio on the boat. You two are obviously not old enough to appreciate doing something for 40 years. And so I'm kind of done. For many, many years, I had planned to do writing in my older life, when maybe then I might have something interesting to say. And I only started feeling that way recently, after being up here and quiet for a while.
When we reached out to you, you said you hadn't seen Cowboy Bebop in like decades. And you said it brought you a real laugh to think about this project. What made it so memorable, or why does it bring a smile to your face?
There was so many. Okay, you asked me this question too, were you cast for it? And back in those days, they didn't have casting calls. You knew people, and people knew the work that you did. And you would just get a call. Hey, dude, do you want to play a flea in this German cartoon thing? Do you want to be the lead guy in this racer German live action thing? Dude, do you want to do this thing on Cowboy Bebop? And I was like, yeah, how come I didn't hear anything about the original roles? And they're like, well, we'll bring you on for one. We've got this really, really juicy thing for you. I was like, okay, good. And back then, you didn't see the script. When I did King of the Hill, and I played all those characters on King of the Hill, so many episodes, I used to get a script delivered to my house by a messenger that would say, Mr. Thomas, here's your script. And there would be a script with my name on it. King of the Hill, episode whatever, Hanks Ho, David Thomas. And then it had you open it up and you're like, how many characters do I have? And I usually would have, 3 or 4. But back then, when I did this, it was like, I got a job. You want to be here at 2 on Tuesday? Okay, I'm there at 2. And we rolled through that entire show a couple of hours. I was very fond of working really fast. In fact, I know you guys know who Richard Epcar is, right?
I'm familiar, yes.
Yeah. Epcar and I used to do all kinds of crazy projects. And I really liked working fast. And I could tell what the character was going to do. I knew how to make it sound right. I could just reach and grab the timings in my head, and I could do phenomenal amounts of work in short periods of time. And then, especially on projects where Richard and I worked together alone, we would bust out 2 hours of what would take everybody else 6 or 7 hours to do. And then we would just go and have beers and chill out in a bar and drink and then go back and do 2-line pickup. And then we call it a day. When they came out with Jackie Chan's film, The Tuxedo, there was this big, huge reach out in Hollywood for the best guy that does the best Jackie Chan. And so they ran to Richard and they were like, Richard, I know you've done a lot of these. You know, who do you recommend? He was like, there's only one guy. And they were like, who? And he was like, Dave is the guy. He's done them more times. And so I ended up doing every loop, 6,009 loops in 3 days at 20th Century Fox. The director made me do it all facing away from the screen because he didn't believe that it was me. He had to watch my lips move. And then they made me come back the 4th day on Thursday just so they could pay me for an extra day. I walked in, I did 2 lines, and then they paid me for the whole day. And then that was it.
So you said you only had Gren's script in your hand for 2 hours.
Should have seen the look on my face when I was like, wait a minute, dude. I thought I was like a war dude. Who's the chick? And they're like, that's your character. And I was like, what? So we had to have a moment in the studio. I was like, should I do something to my voice? And then I'm like, how did this happen? And then, I find out and I'm like, quasi maybe possible, but we can stretch it. I'll believe it. And then I was like, I'm trying to explore all these different ideas while I'm doing it. And, there was a couple of things and we kind of had to settle on, kind of leaving him with a masculine voice, which scientifically speaking, now we know as men get more of those hormones and they start to change, their voices are affected too. You asked me, so Netflix is going to do this as a live action?
Yes. So Netflix is doing a live action reimagining of Cowboy Bebop, and Gren is in it. They have chosen a non-binary actor, and they are making the character non-binary as well. And we've had a lot of talk on this podcast in previous episodes and just amongst ourselves about the idea that maybe that was always the intention, but back in the 90s, maybe they didn't have the language to capture that. So we were curious what you were told about Gren's gender or Gren's sexuality. What information did you have?
That was put very well. We really did not have the public language to talk about what was happening there. It wasn't new. I wasn't shocked, when I saw it, and I did think it appealed to me because I like edges. I like the edges of everything, and that's where the real stuff happens. That's where all the good stuff happens. Anyway, it wasn't really talked about in the session. We called it, we sort of pawned it off as being science fiction. Maybe it could happen in the future. We don't know. How do we know? They could happen like that. Certainly nobody at that time I don't think people really realized what they were pushing up against then. But I mean, ever since the 60s and people got high and then woke up and everybody else is closed, it was, we started to change our perspective, which is what's given us the language today to talk about it as openly as we can now. I thought we were going to get more pushback. I thought we were all going to get in trouble somehow. I thought that it was going to affect the show. It certainly had the potential to affect the show in a negative way. The people that like to think that they control the narrative to most of the population, I think are still underestimating where we all are. And, we're still waiting for them to catch up.
You brought up an interesting point about this character being portrayed a little bit more effeminate to begin with in their character style. In anime, we tend to say that's more of a bishoujo style. Gren approaches the only bishoujo kind of character design I think we see in this show. And that was an interesting creative take. Did you have input into the softness or perhaps some of the other qualities of Gren's voice? Or was it all just workshopped on the fly and you were given the green light?
Most of these jobs are dealt with line by line. And, I did not have the benefit of that actress in the booth with me working at the same time. She wasn't even there that day. I just did all my line. And so when you're not working with an actor, in person, you have to just go for the best performance. And I think one of the reasons that I worked so much in voiceover was because I just found some way to be honest about what I was letting come out of my mouth, and or putting a picture behind it that was something that I could hang my hat on and believe in. Like, that was the only way. When I first started out, I did a lot of oil commercials, and then I just simply refused to do them anymore. And it was like, a lot of people told me I was stupid, but I was like, I'll just find another way to make money. But, I used to have to make these huge scenarios where, my dog was needed to get to the vet. The only reason I could get to the vet was because the gasoline that I had in my car. And that's why I could, it was like all these fake backstories so that I could make the product sell. And oftentimes that's how you make anything sound real anyway.
So you watched Cowboy Bebop for this podcast for the first time in forever, and we really appreciate that. I'm just tickled. But what are some other ways that you and Gren are alike? Perhaps musical talents or superstitions? What do you have in common?
I have done a lot of things, so I have a lot of things in common with a lot of the characters that I play. But Gren, I played saxophone for a while. I started out on the violin. And then my family was just, they just were like, we just can't, you just can't be a violinist. Yeah.
Oh, no.
And then when I was in the Army, that's when I started playing around with the saxophone, because I met this kid who was a brilliant mechanic, and he he blew my mind on the saxophone. He used to play it in the hallways in the barracks all the time, and it was great. And then I have a couple of guitars and a ukulele and a bunch of little percussion things. And I jam with my friends a lot, I really get a big kick out of it. Not that I'm a great musician, but I know some. But I like playing jams because it's the only time in communication where, if everybody's listening carefully, we can all talk at once.
So Gren has a number of admirers, sometimes even outpacing our own main cast, such as Spike and Jet. And that's always fascinating. What do you have to say to all the Gren admirers out there?
Well, I love you guys for falling in love with this character. I try to connect with every character that I play, and I'm a big fan of the underdog. There was some other characters like Gren that my characters often have a great message, and that's something that you can really hang on to. I mean, Gren is a really great dude, and he did a lot to give the show sincere credibility.
So, in your opinion, I know you didn't have a lot of time to think about this. I think we broke this news to you. What would you like to see in a live-action reimagining, or what do you hope they might do?
I think that they could really benefit from a linguist. Like, one of my heroes is John McWhorter, and he's a linguist, and the way words are created in a working language, that's going to be indicative of the future. They're going to, our language, English, is going to be further bastardized until it's, other things too, and a lot of authors have played with Spanglish and all sorts of different kinds of Esperanto, or different kinds of melds of multiple languages. And that's another thing that happens on those edges. And that's what's really cool about anime is it's a product that was created on the edge. And that's why it's still around today. And I think I remember saying that, in the studio many times when I did this, or when I did Techno Man, when I played Blade, or I said this stuff, some of it is art on another level, and people are not smart enough to really understand just how great this stuff is.
So why do you think people still like Cowboy Bebop to this day? Why is it still resonating with people? Or, we're making a podcast, Netflix is doing it. It obviously did have that staying power.
It's freaking cool. I mean, it is cool, okay? They talk about drugs. They're in spaceships. The whole way that they travel from planet to planet, going through hula hoops, super dope. That's the kind of technology that's probably going to allow us to go actually faster than the speed of light. It's going to have to be some sort of gradation thing that kind of spins you up every time you go through another hoop.
So now that you are going on your boat and we can expect a book out in the near future, hopefully, what else is coming down the pike for you? Anything else about your podcast or other things that we should know about?
Yeah, my podcast is Hollywood and Holly Wild, and you can find that on SoundCloud. And then you can see some of the crazy indie work that I've done on YouTube as well by looking up my page under David Thomas VO, as in voiceover, and my Instagram the same way, David Thomas VO. And that's got some of my adventures talking to animals. I'm always talking to deer or bunnies or something.
We want to talk to them too. I've learned a bit.
Yeah, I've got lots of regulars. Well, thanks for having me here on your show, ladies.
You've just been such a delight to talk to. Thank you for scheduling with us so quickly. You were kind of an enigma to find online. And when we finally discovered you, you were just wonderful. We really appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I actually kind of am an enigma, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll keep track of your exploits on Instagram. They've been great.
Okay, good. Yeah, every now and then I have a good video and something funny to say. Well, thanks very much. Good luck with the show, and enjoy Cowboy Bebop and my obviously famous character, Gren.
We will.
Who knew?
Thanks again to Dave Thomas for that fascinating and kind interview. We learned so much. Next week, we learn what becomes of Gren and the rest of our heroes, and what the heck is up with that music box. We will see you on Friday with another episode of the Bebop Beat. Goodbye, everybody!
So long!
Thank you for listening to the Bebop Beat. If you like our show, please rate us on Apple or wherever you find your podcasts. Find us on Instagram and Twitter at Bebop Beat. Our email address is bebopbeatpodcast@gmail.com.
The Bebop Beat is hosted and produced by Jamie Sanchez and Lauren Fates. Our editor and associate producer is Angela Geis. Our logo and art assets are by Kat Janda. Dog.
Awoo! Watson did a big awoo. Watson did nothing wrong.